My parents said, "We wish you were never born." I stood tall and said, "If that is what you wish, then consider me as if I never existed." Then I walked out. 30 minutes later, the whole party panicked. 38. Missed calls. I need to get this off my chest because it's been eating at me for weeks now. And honestly, I think writing it all down might help me process what happened. This is going to be long, so grab some popcorn if you're settling in. For context, I'm Nicole, 28 years old, and I've spent most of my life being the family disappointment. My older brother Jason is a cardiac surgeon married to a lawyer named Stephanie. My younger sister, Rebecca, just made partner at prestigious accounting firm at 26. Meanwhile, I'm a freelance graphic designer who also teaches art classes to kids on weekends. I love my work. I make decent money, and I'm happy. But to my parents, Margaret and David Chen, I might as well be unemployed. Growing up, I was always the odd one out. Jason excelled at everything academic. Rebecca was the golden child who could do no wrong. I was the kid who got paint on the carpet, who chose art school over pre-med, who didn't want the cookie-cutter life my parents had planned. Every family dinner became an interrogation about when I get a real job. Every holiday involved passive-aggressive comments about my hobby career. The incident that finally broke me happened 3 weeks ago at my parents' 35th wedding anniversary party. They'd rented out this fancy venue, invited about 150 people, and basically turned it into a celebration of their perfect family. I should have seen the red flags when Mom called me 2 weeks before and asked if I could dress appropriately for once and maybe not mention your little art thing too much. I showed up wearing a tasteful navy dress, heels, the whole 9 yards. I'd even brought an expensive bottle of wine as a gift. The party was already in full swing when I arrived. Jason was holding court with a group of my parents' friends, talking about some groundbreaking surgery he performed. Rebecca was showing off her engagement ring, having gotten engaged literally a week prior to some guy named Trevor who works in finance. I made my rounds, said hello to relatives I hadn't seen in years, and tried to blend into the background. That's when my Aunt Linda asked me what I'd been up to. I mentioned that I'd just finished a major project for a tech startup, designing their entire brand identity, and that I'd been featured in a local design magazine. I was proud of this. It was a huge deal in my... Then she said to Aunt Linda, "My still doing her little drawings. We keep hoping she'll grow out of it." I felt my face get hot, but I smiled and excused myself to get a drink. I stood at the bar trying to calm down, reminding myself that I was an adult with a successful career and that my mother's opinion didn't define me. I'd spent years in therapy learning to set boundaries and not let their words destroy me. Then came the speeches. My dad went first, talking about how proud he was of his family, how Jason had saved lives, how Rebecca was making waves in the business world. He looked right past me, didn't mention my name once, not even a passing reference to having 3 children. Mom went next. She thanked everyone for coming, gushed about her 2 incredible children and their accomplishments, and then said something that made my blood run cold. "We've been truly blessed with Jason and Rebecca. They've given us every reason to be proud parents. 2 children." She said, 2 children. The room was spinning a little, but I held it together. Maybe it was a slip of the tongue. Maybe she just forgot in the moment. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt, even though my gut was screaming at me to leave right then. After the speeches, I went to find my parents. They were standing with a group of their oldest friends, the Mitchells and the Rodriguezes, people who had known me since I was a baby. I approached with my wine glass, intending to just say hello and maybe gently remind Mom that she'd left me out of her speech. But before I could say anything, Mrs. Mitchell said, "Margaret, you must be so proud of all your children. I remember when they were tiny." My mom's face did something weird. A flash of annoyance crossed it before she rearranged it into a smile. "Oh, yes. Well, Jason and Rebecca have certainly exceeded every expectation." "And Nicole," Mrs. Rodriguez prompted, smiling at me kindly. "I heard you're doing wonderful things with your art." The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like an hour. My dad's jaw tightened. Mom's smile became brittle. Then my dad said, "Nicole has chosen a very different path." "Different doesn't mean wrong," Mr. Mitchell said diplomatically. That's when my mom said it. She had a few glasses of champagne, and whatever filter she usually maintained just evaporated. She looked straight at Mrs. Rodriguez and said, "Honestly, sometimes I wonder what we did to deserve such a disappointment." "Jason and Rebecca give us such joy. But Nicole," she trailed off, shaking her head. Mrs. Mitchell looked horrified. Mrs. Rodriguez's mouth fell open. I stood there frozen, waiting for my dad to say something, anything to defend me. Instead, he put his hand on my mom's shoulder and said to their friends, "It's been difficult. You raise your children with certain hopes and expectations, and when one of them just refuses to live up to their potential, it's heartbreaking." Something inside me cracked. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I'm standing right here." I finally managed to say, "We know," my mother said, not even looking at me. "We've always known you were there, Nicole. Sometimes we wish you were never born. Our lives would have been so much simpler with just two children who actually appreciated everything we did for them." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually took a step backward around us. The conversations had stopped. People were staring. Jason appeared at the edge of the group with Stephanie, both of them wide-eyed. Rebecca was nowhere to be seen. My hands started shaking, and I carefully set down my wine glass on a nearby table because I was afraid I'd drop it. I could feel tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to cry here. I refused to give him that. I looked at my father, really looked at him, hoping to see some remorse, some indication that Mom's words had gone too far. He just looked tired and annoyed, like I was an inconvenience he'd been dealing with for too long. I'd spent 28 years trying to earn their love, their approval, their basic respect. I'd gone to family dinners where I was ignored. I'd sat through holidays where my accomplishments were dismissed. I'd listened to years of subtle digs and outright insults. I'd paid for my own college because they told me if I wasn't going to study medicine or law, they weren't wasting money on art school. I'd built a successful career despite them, not because of them. And suddenly, standing there in that rented venue with 150 people watching, I realized I was done, completely done. I straightened my spine, lifted my chin, and looked my mother directly in the eyes. My voice came out steady and clear. "If that is what you wish, then consider me as if I never existed." I turned to my father. "You just got your desire. You now have 2 children instead of 3. Congratulations." Then I looked around at the crowd of shocked faces. For anyone who cares, it was never that I didn't appreciate what they did for me. It's that they never appreciated who I am. There's a difference. I picked up my purse from where I'd set it on a chair and walked toward the exit. My heels clicked on the marble floor, and the sound echoed in the sudden silence. I could hear my mother saying something behind me, her voice rising, but I didn't turn around. Jason called my name. I kept walking. I made it to my car, got in, locked the doors, and drove. I didn't know where I was going. I just drove. My hands were still shaking, and the tears I've been holding back finally came, blurring my vision so badly I had to pull over into a shopping center parking lot. I sat there in my car and sobbed, not just for what had happened tonight, but for everything. For every dismissive comment, every disappointed look, every time I've been made to feel like I wasn't enough. After about 20 minutes, I pulled myself together enough to check my phone. 3 missed calls from Jason. I turned off my phone completely. I couldn't deal with it. Not yet. I drove to my apartment, which I'd been so proud to afford on my own, and I sat on my couch in the dark. I thought about calling my best friend Hannah, but I didn't know what to say. How do you explain that your parents publicly stated they wished you'd never been born? Around 9 p.m., I finally turned my phone back on. The notifications exploded. 38 missed calls, dozens of text messages. My voicemail was full. Most of the calls were from my parents' number, several from Jason, a few from Rebecca, some from numbers I didn't recognize, probably relatives who'd been at the party. I ignored all of them and went straight to the text messages. Jason had sent about 15 messages, starting with Nicole, "Where did you go?" and escalating to everyone's freaking out. "You need to come back." And finally, Dad just had to sit down. Mom's crying. What the hell did you think would happen? Rebecca's messages were shorter. "You made a scene at Mom and Dad's party. Really mature, Nicole." Then, 30 minutes later, okay, I heard what they actually said. "Call me." There were messages from Aunt Linda, from Mrs. Rodriguez, from cousins I barely knew. but the ones that caught my attention were from my mother's number. The first one sent about 30 minutes after I'd left. "Nicole, you need to come back right now. You've embarrassed us in front of our friends." 10 minutes after that, "Where are you?" People are asking questions. 20 minutes later, your father isn't feeling well. If something happens to him because of your stunt, it's on you. And then about an hour after I'd left, "Please just call us. We need to talk about this." I stared at that last message for a long time. They needed to talk. Not "we're sorry," not "we didn't mean it." Just "we need to talk," like I was the problem that needed to be managed. I put my phone on silent and went to bed, though I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying the whole night in my head. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Not just sad, but genuinely angry. Who says that to their child? Who looks at their daughter and tells her they wish she'd never been born? The next morning, my phone was at 3% battery from all the calls it had been receiving. I plugged it in and made coffee. My hands were steadier now. I felt oddly calm, like I'd passed through some kind of emotional storm and come out the other side into clear air. I had 67 new messages. I scrolled through them with detached interest. Jason was still trying to play mediator. "Can you please just call Mom and Dad? They're really upset." Rebecca had switched to, "I think what they said was horrible, but you walking out made everything worse." Aunt Linda's message said, "Honey, I don't know what to say. What your mother said was unforgivable. I'm here if you need me." Mrs. Rodriguez had texted, "Nicole, dear, your mother and father are wrong. You are a lovely young woman with real talent. Don't let their words define you." There were more messages from my parents, but I couldn't bring myself to read them yet. Instead, I made breakfast, took a long shower, and sat down at my computer. I had work to do. A client was waiting for revisions on a logo design, and I had a class to teach on Monday. As I worked, I realized something. I felt lighter, like a weight I'd been carrying for years had suddenly lifted. Yes, what happened was horrible. Yes, it hurt like hell. But I finally stopped pretending that if I just tried hard enough, was successful enough, was good enough, my parents would see me the way they saw Jason and Rebecca. They wouldn't. They couldn't. And that wasn't my fault. Around noon, Jason called. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message. "Nicole, I know you're angry, and you have a right to be. What Mom said was way out of line, but please, can we just talk? They're saying they want to apologize." I almost laughed at that. They wanted to apologize. After 38 missed calls and hours of messages that never included the words, "I'm sorry," now they wanted to apologize. I texted him back, "Tell them I appreciate the thought, but I'm not interested in an apology right now. I need space." His response was immediate. "Nicole, you're being unreasonable. They made a mistake. People say things they don't mean when they're stressed." I stared at that text for a long moment, then typed back, "They told me they wish I'd never been born. Jason, that's not something you say by accident. That's not stress talking. That's how they really feel. You're overreacting," he replied. And there it was. Even Jason, who had witnessed the whole thing, was more concerned with keeping the peace than acknowledging what had actually happened. I put my phone down and went back to work. That afternoon, I decided to do something I'd been avoiding for years. I went through old photo albums that I'd shoved in the back of my closet. I needed to understand if I was crazy, if I was imagining the favoritism, or if it was as real as I remembered. The evidence was damning. In the family photos from when we were kids, Jason was always front and center. Rebecca was usually next to Mom, who had her arm around her. I was consistently positioned at the edge of the frame, sometimes partially cut off. In our high school graduation photos, Jason's was professionally framed and hung in the living room. Rebecca's was right next to it. Mine was in a drawer somewhere, probably still in the envelope from the photography studio. I found my college acceptance letter to the Art Institute tucked into one of the albums. I'd forgotten I'd even kept it. On the back, in my teenage handwriting, I'd written, "They said, art school isn't real college. They said I'm wasting my potential, but I'm going anyway." The defiance in those words made my heart ache for 18-year-old me, who'd been so determined to follow her dreams despite having no support system. There were birthday cards in there, too. I opened one for my 21st birthday. The card from my parents had a generic happy birthday message with a check for $50 and their signatures. No personal note, No, we love you. Nothing. I compared it to Rebecca's 21st birthday card, which I'd seen on her dresser years ago when I'd helped her move apartments. Theirs had been filled with a handwritten paragraph about how special she was, how proud they were, how much joy she brought to their lives. The difference was stark, undeniable. I wasn't making it up. I found drawings I'd made as a kid, stuffed in the back of one album. A family portrait I'd drawn when I was maybe 7 or 8. I'd drawn all 5 of us holding hands with a big sun overhead and flowers everywhere. At the bottom, in crayon, I'd written my family. I love you. Looking at it now, I could see how much I'd wanted to belong, how hard I tried to be part of them. There was a report card from 5th grade. All A's except for 1 B in math. My teacher had written a note. Nicole is exceptionally creative and shows real talent in art. She's a joy to have in class. My mother had written in the margin in red pen, needs to focus more on important subjects. I sat on my bedroom floor, surrounded by these artifacts of my childhood, and something became crystal clear. This hadn't started at the anniversary party. This had been happening my entire life. I'd just gotten so used to it, so skilled at minimizing it, that I convinced myself it wasn't that bad. But it was that bad. It had always been that bad. My phone rang. It was Stephanie, Jason's wife. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Nicole," she said, her voice gentle. "I hope it's okay that I'm calling." "That depends on why you're calling," I said carefully. "I want you to know that I think what your parents said was inexcusable. Jason and I had a huge fight about it last night. He thinks you're being too sensitive, and I told him he was being willfully blind." I felt my throat tighten. "Thank you for that. I need to tell you something," Stephanie continued. "Something I probably should have told you years ago. Your parents talk about you differently when you're not around." "I'm aware," I said bitterly. "No. I mean, it's worse than you think. Last Christmas, when you left early to go to Hannah's family dinner, your mother spent 20 minutes complaining to the other guests about how you'd abandoned the family gathering for some friend. She said you'd always been selfish, that you'd always put yourself first, that you'd never appreciated the sacrifices they made for you." My hand clenched around the phone. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I was a coward," Stephanie admitted. "I didn't want to cause drama. I didn't want to put Jason in a difficult position. But after what happened at the anniversary party, I realized my silence made me complicit. I'm sorry, Nicole. You deserve to have someone speak up for you, and I didn't. Does Jason know you're calling me?" "No. He'd be angry if he knew. He wants everyone to just smooth things over and pretend nothing happened. But something did happen, and it's been happening for years." She paused. "I have daughters, Nicole, twin girls. They're 3 years old. If anyone ever treated one of them the way your parents treat you, I'd lose my mind. You deserve so much better than this." After we hung up, I cried again, but this time it felt different. I wasn't crying because I was sad. I was crying because someone had finally validated what I'd experienced. Someone from inside the family had acknowledged the truth instead of gaslighting me or telling me I was too sensitive. The next day, I got a call from my Uncle Richard, my dad's brother. We'd never been particularly close, but he'd always been kind to me in a distant sort of way. "Nicole, your aunt showed me what happened on some family text chain." He said, "I'm calling because I owe you an apology too." "You weren't even at the party," I said, confused. "No, but I've been at plenty of other family gatherings over the years. I've heard the way your parents talk about you. I've seen the way they dismiss your accomplishments. I never said anything because I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere in how your parents raised you." He cleared his throat. "But you're not a child anymore. You're a grown woman, and the way they treat you is wrong. I should have said something years ago." "Why are you saying something now?" I asked. "Because Linda called me after the party, furious about what Margaret said to you. She said if I didn't reach out to you, she'd never forgive me. And she's right. Family isn't supposed to stand by while one of their own is being torn down." He sighed. "I'm sorry I was silent when you needed someone to speak up. These phone calls, these unexpected shows of support, they started to add up. It turned out that a lot of people had noticed how my parents treated me. They just never said anything because it's uncomfortable to call out that kind of dysfunction, especially when the victims themselves are trying to pretend everything is fine. I started wondering how many family gatherings I'd attended where people had witnessed my parents' cruelty and said nothing. How many times had I smiled through the pain while everyone else looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. That evening, I went for a long walk through my neighborhood. The weather was perfect, that late summer warmth without the oppressive heat. I passed families having dinner on their patios, kids riding bikes, couples walking dogs, normal life continuing around me. While my world had completely shifted, I thought about the version of myself I'd been before the anniversary party. The Nicole who would have apologized by now, who would have shown up at my parents' house with flowers and contrition, who would have twisted herself into knots trying to fix a relationship that was broken from the start. I didn't want to be that Nicole anymore. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life begging for crumbs of affection from people who would never truly see me or value me. When I got home, there was a package on my doorstep. Inside was a book about setting boundaries with toxic family members sent by Aunt Linda with a note. This helped me. Maybe it'll help you too. I love you, and I'm proud of the woman you've become. I read the entire book that night. So many pages felt like they'd been written specifically about my life. The chapter on scapegoating and families hit particularly hard. It described exactly what I'd experienced. Being singled out as the problem child, having my accomplishments minimized, being blamed for family dysfunction, serving as a contrast to make my siblings look better. The book talked about how families often need a scapegoat to maintain their equilibrium, how the scapegoat role is assigned early and reinforced through years of subtle and overt messaging. It explained how leaving that role, refusing to play along anymore, can cause the entire family system to panic and pressure the scapegoat to come back and resume their position. Suddenly, the 38 missed calls made perfect sense. It wasn't that my parents desperately miss me or realized they'd made a terrible mistake. It was that I disrupted the system by refusing to accept their treatment anymore. I'd broken the pattern, and patterns are comforting even when they're harmful. The book also warned about something called hoovering, when toxic family members try to suck you back in with apologies, promises to change, or manufactured emergencies. It said, these attempts rarely lead to genuine change and usually just reset the cycle of abuse. I thought about my mother's letters, my father's health scare that Jason had mentioned in passing, the sudden interest in reconciliation. Were they genuinely sorry, or were they just trying to restore the family dynamic to what it had been before? Over the next few days, the calls and messages continued, but they became less frequent. I'd made it clear I wasn't coming around, and apparently they were starting to accept it. Or at least they were giving up for the moment. I started going back through my career achievements, documenting them in a way I never had before. I'd always downplayed my success because my parents had taught me that what I did wasn't valuable. But looking at it objectively, I'd built something impressive. I'd been freelancing successfully for 6 years. My client list included 3 Fortune 500 companies, a handful of successful startups, and numerous small businesses whose brands I'd helped build from the ground up. I'd been featured in design publications 4 times. I'd won 2 regional design awards. My weekend art classes had a waiting list 6 months long. I'd done all of this while paying my own rent, my own bills, my own student loans from the art school my parents refused to fund. I built a life and a career from nothing, with no family support, no financial safety net, no encouragement. And somehow, I'd still spent years feeling like I was failing because I didn't have the kind of success my parents valued. I made a list of every dismissive comment I could remember. It filled 3 pages. That's nice, dear. But when are you getting a real job? Couldn't you have studied something more practical? We can't tell our friends you're an artist, Nicole. It sounds like you're unemployed. Why can't you be more like your brother? Rebecca would never disappoint us like this. 3 pages of small cruelties that had accumulated over decades. Then I made another list. Every accomplishment they'd ignored or minimized. My first big client contract. My first published article about design theory. The art show where 3 of my pieces sold. The scholarship I'd won in art school. The time a local news station interviewed me about my children's art program. The grant I'd received to expand my community classes. They'd been absent for all of it, or worse, they'd been present but dismissive, finding ways to turn my achievements into evidence of my failure to meet their expectations. I called my therapist and made an emergency appointment. I've been seeing Dr. Patricia Chen, no relation, different spelling, even on and off for years. mostly to deal with anxiety that I now realize stemmed directly from my family dynamics. "Nicole," she said when I sat down in her office, "you look different." "Different how?" "Like you finally let yourself get angry." She was right. For years, I've been turning my anger inward, transforming it into anxiety and self-doubt and depression. Now it was flowing outward. And while it hurt, it also felt clean somehow, honest. I told her everything about the anniversary party. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing more concerned. As I spoke, "What they said to you constitutes emotional abuse," she said when I finished. "I want you to hear me say that clearly. What happened wasn't just your parents having a bad day or saying something unfortunate in the heat of the moment. It was a public expression of how they treated you privately for your entire life. Everyone keeps telling me I should forgive them. I said that family is important. Bet I'll regret cutting them off. Do you want to forgive them?" I thought about it honestly. I don't know. Part of me wants them to actually see me and love me for who I am, but another part of me is so tired of hoping for that, so tired of getting hurt over and over again. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. Dr. Chen said you can forgive them for your own peace while still maintaining boundaries. Or you can choose not to forgive them. Both are valid options. What matters is that you're making choices that protect your well-being instead of sacrificing yourself to maintain a relationship that harms you. I keep wondering if I'm being too harsh. I admit it, if I'm throwing away a relationship that could be salvaged. Let me ask you this. In all the years you've known them, have they ever made sustained, genuine changes to how they treat you? I opened my mouth to say yes, then closed it. No, I finally said they'll be nice for a few weeks after a big fight, but then it always goes back to the way it was. That's your answer then. You're not obligated to keep hoping they'll change if their pattern of behavior suggests they won't. The session helped, but it also made everything feel more real. I wasn't just having a fight with my parents that would blow over eventually. I was fundamentally reshaping my relationship with them, possibly permanently. When I left her office, I felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter because I'd given myself permission to protect myself. Heavier because I was grieving the parents I'd always wanted but never had. That night, Hannah came over with takeout and wine. We sat on my couch eating pie and talking about everything except my family drama until I was ready to bring it up. "Do you think I'm doing the right thing?" I finally asked. Hannah, who'd witnessed years of my parents' treatment and had been urging me to set boundaries for ages, looked at me seriously. "I think you're doing the brave thing. Whether it's the right thing is something only you can know." "That's not helpful," I said, but I was smiling a little. "Okay, you want honesty? I've hated watching what they do to you. Every time we'd have plans and you'd cancel because there was a family dinner, I knew you'd come back sad. Every holiday season, you'd get stressed for weeks beforehand. Every conversation about your career, you qualify it with, 'It's not a real job like my siblings have.' They've been poisoning your self-worth for years, Nicole. So yes, I think stepping back is the right thing. I just wish you'd done it sooner." "I didn't know I could," I said quietly. "I thought I had to keep trying. You don't. You never did." We talked late into the night. Hannah told me about her own experience setting boundaries with her alcoholic father, how hard it had been, but how necessary. She reminded me of times she'd watched me shrink myself to fit my parents' expectations. Times I'd hidden my successes because I knew they wouldn't celebrate them. Times I'd cried after family gatherings. "You're the most talented person I know," Hannah said. "You create beautiful things. You teach kids to believe in themselves. You build brands that help businesses succeed. You're kind and funny and smart. The fact that your parents can't see that isn't a reflection on you. It's a reflection on them." Her words settled into my chest, warm and true. Maybe I'd needed to hear them from someone who actually knew me, someone who'd chosen to be in my life rather than being obligated by blood. After Hannah left, I sat at my computer and did something impulsive. I wrote a blog post about my experience, not naming names, keeping details vague, but talking about the experience of being the scapegoat in a family, of being told you're not enough, of finally choosing yourself. I published it on my professional website, not expecting much response. By morning, it had dozens of comments from other designers, other creative professionals, other people who had been told their art wasn't a real career, that they were disappointing their families, that they needed to be more practical. "Thank you for writing this," one comment said. I've been feeling like a failure because my parents don't understand what I do. This helped me realize I'm not alone. Another raid. My family still asks when I'm going to get a real job. I've been a professional illustrator for 10 years. Your post gave me the courage to stop explaining myself. Reading those comments, I realized my experience wasn't unique. There were thousands of people out there whose families didn't value their creative work, who were made to feel less than because they'd chosen unconventional paths. We were all carrying the same wounds, the same doubts planted by people who were supposed to nurture us. I responded to every comment, and that simple act of connection helped me feel less isolated in my decision. Rebecca called on day 4. I actually answered because I was curious what she'd say. Nicole, she started, her voice cautious. How are you? I'm fine, I said, which was partially true. Look, I know Mom and Dad really hurt you. What they said was awful. I told them that. Did you? I kept my voice neutral. Yes, I told Mom she was way out of line. But Nicole, you have to understand. They've been under a lot of stress lately. Dad's been having health issues and Mom's been worried. Rebecca, stop! I cut her off. Their stress doesn't excuse telling me they wish I'd never been born. Nothing excuses that. She was quiet for a moment. Then maybe you misheard. Maybe it came out wrong. I felt a flash of anger. There were a dozen people standing there who heard exactly what I heard. Don't gaslight me. I'm not trying to. Yes, you are. You're making excuses for them because it's easier than admitting that our parents are capable of being cruel. I lived with that cruelty for years, Rebecca. You just never noticed because you were the favorite. She made a small sound, like I'd struck a nerve. That's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time Mom dismissed your career? When did Dad ever leave you out of a speech about his children? When did they tell you that you were a disappointment? Silence. Exactly, I said softly. I'm not angry at you, Rebecca, but I can't pretend this is something that can be fixed with a quick apology and a family dinner. This has been building for 28 years. So what are you saying? You're just done with them? I'm saying I'm done trying to be someone they'll approve of. If they want a relationship with me, it needs to be based on who I actually am, not who they wish I was. We talked for a few more minutes, but it was clear we weren't going to agree. She thought I was being stubborn. I thought she was being blind. We hung up with a promise to talk again soon, though I wasn't sure either of us meant it. A week after the party, I got a letter in the mail, an actual physical letter in my mother's handwriting. I let it sit on my kitchen counter for 2 days before I opened it. The letter was 3 pages long. The gist of it was that they were sorry I'd been hurt, that they'd said things in the heat of the moment, and that they hoped we could put this behind us and move forward as a family. There was no acknowledgement of the years of dismissiveness, no recognition of the pattern of behavior, no understanding of why their words had cut so deep. It was an apology that wasn't really an apology. It was damage control. I wrote back. I kept it short. Dear Mom and Dad, thank you for your letter. I appreciate that you recognize your words hurt me. However, what happened at your anniversary party was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of years of being made to feel less than, being dismissed, and being treated like a disappointment. I need you to understand that an apology isn't enough. If you truly want a relationship with me going forward, things need to change fundamentally. That means respecting my career, respecting my choices, and treating me with the same consideration you give Jason and Rebecca. Until that happens, I think it's best we keep our distance. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because I deserve better, and I'm finally ready to demand it. Nicole, I sent the letter and felt a sense of finality. This was it. I'd drawn my line in the sand. Hannah, when I finally told her everything, was furious on my behalf. You should have called me that night, she said. I would have driven over with ice cream and wine. I needed to be alone, I admitted. I needed to process it without anyone trying to make me feel better or tell me what to do. Are they actually going to change? She asked, skeptical. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe not, but at least I've said what needed to be said. It's been 3 weeks now since the party. The calls have stopped. I got a brief text from my mother saying they needed time to think about things, which I took to mean they were waiting for me to cave and come crawling back with an apology for causing a scene. I'm not going to do that. For the first time in my life, I'm putting my own well-being first. If that makes me selfish in their eyes, so be it. The funny thing is, my life hasn't fallen apart like I feared it might. My business is actually thriving. I picked up 2 new major clients this week. My weekend art classes are fully booked. I've been sleeping better, eating better, and I haven't had a stress headache in days. Aunt Linda took me out for lunch last week and told me she was proud of me. Your mother is my sister, and I love her, she said. But she's wrong about you, Nicole. She's always been wrong about you. You're doing exactly what you should be doing, and you're doing it well." That made me cry a little, but in a good way. Mrs. Rodriguez sent me a beautiful arrangement of flowers with a note that said, "Keep painting the world with your colors." Even some of my parents' friends, people I'd expected to take their side, reached out to say they'd been shocked by what happened and that they thought I'd handled it with grace. Jason finally stopped trying to mediate and sent me a text that just said, "I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you sooner. I should have. You deserve better from all of us." That one actually meant something. Rebecca and I are slowly finding our way to a new normal. She's starting to understand that she was sheltered from a lot of the negativity I experienced because she fit the mold my parents wanted. We had coffee yesterday and she said, "I always thought they were hard on you, but I told myself you were just being sensitive. I'm realizing now that I was wrong. They were awful to you." I don't know what's going to happen with my parents. Maybe they'll realize they need to change. Maybe they won't. Maybe we'll rebuild some kind of relationship eventually. Or maybe this is the end of our story as a family. What I do know is that I'm done setting myself on fire to keep them warm. I'm done shrinking myself to fit into their narrow definition of success. I'm done apologizing for being who I am. They said they wished I'd never been born, and I told them to consider me as if I never existed. Those words still hurt when I think about them. Probably always will. But I meant what I said. If they can't love me as I am, then they don't get to have me in their lives at all. I walked out of that party with 38 missed calls waiting for me. But I walked into a life where I'm finally free, and honestly, that feels like the best revenge of all. Update. A few people have been asking for an update in the comments, so here goes. It's been about 2 months since the party now, and things have shifted in unexpected ways. My dad had what my mom called a minor health scare about 3 weeks ago. Jason called to tell me, and I could hear the expectation in his voice that I'd come running to the hospital. I asked what happened, and he admitted Dad had a panic attack that they'd initially thought was a heart issue. He was fine, fully cleared by doctors. No actual medical emergency. I sent flowers to the hospital with a card that said, "Glad you're okay. Take care of yourself." I didn't visit. Jason was livid about that, but honestly, I've learned that their emergencies are often manufactured to get me to fall in line. I wasn't falling for it this time. What really changed things was my mother showing up at one of my weekend art classes 2 weeks ago. I was teaching a group of 8-year-olds how to mix colors when I looked up and saw her standing in the doorway of the community center, watching. My stomach dropped. I considered asking her to leave, but I had a class to teach and kids who were counting on me. So I finished the lesson, helped the kids clean up, and waited until their parents picked them up before addressing her. "What are you doing here?" I asked. She looked smaller than I remembered, older somehow. "I wanted to see what you do, really see it." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just started cleaning up paint supplies. She walked around the room, looking at the kids' artwork drying on the racks. "They're good," she said quietly. "The kids, they're really good." "They're learning," I said. "They're brave enough to try, which is the important part." Mom picked up one painting, a messy but joyful explosion of color. "Did you teach them this technique?" "I teach them not to be afraid of making mistakes. The technique comes with practice." She set the painting down carefully. "Nicole, I've been doing a lot of thinking since the party." "Have you?" I kept my voice neutral, continued wiping down tables. "Your Aunt Linda hasn't spoken to me in 3 weeks. Mrs. Rodriguez sent me a very pointed email about how we've treated you. Even your father's golf buddies have been asking uncomfortable questions." She paused. "But that's not why I'm here." I waited. "I went to therapy," she said. "After you sent that letter, I made an appointment with a therapist because your father and I weren't communicating well, and I thought maybe someone could help us understand why you were being so dramatic about everything." I felt a spike of anger at that, but bit my tongue. "The therapist asked me to describe each of my children," Mom continued. "I talked about Jason for 20 minutes. I talked about Rebecca for 15. When I got to you, I realized I was listing all the ways you disappointed me instead of telling her who you actually are." She took a shaky breath. She pointed that out. My hands had stopped moving. I was just standing there, holding a wet sponge, staring at my mother. "She asked me what your favorite color was," Mom said softly. "I didn't know. She asked me what made you happy, what you dreamed about, what you were passionate about beyond just art. I couldn't answer any of it, Nicole. I couldn't answer basic questions about my own daughter." The sponge dripped water onto the floor. "I've been going to therapy twice a week," Mom said, "trying to figure out where I went so wrong, and the answer is everywhere. I went wrong everywhere." I finally found my voice. Why are you telling me this? Because you were right, she said simply. In your letter, you were completely right. We don't deserve a relationship with you until we can actually see you for who you are instead of who we wanted you to be. She looked around the room again. This place, these kids, what you do here, I never bothered to understand it because I'd already decided it wasn't valuable. But you're teaching children to be creative, to be confident, to express themselves. That's important work. I felt tears threatening and blinked them back. One therapy session doesn't fix 28 years, Mom. I know, she said. That's why I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying. Your father is too. He's slower to come around. He's still stuck on the idea that we're the victims here because you embarrassed us at the party. But I'm working on him. We stood in silence for a long moment. I should go, she finally said. I just wanted to see this part of your life. Thank you for letting me, even if you didn't really have a choice. She walked to the door, then turned back. Your favorite color is teal. I remembered that on the drive over. You painted your bedroom teal when you were 14, and we made you repaint it beige because we said it was too bright. You cried for 3 days. I had cried for 3 days. I'd forgotten that. Buried it with all the other small heartbreaks. It's still my favorite color, I said quietly. She nodded, her eyes glistening. I'm sorry I made you change it. I'm sorry for a lot of things. Then she left. I stood in that empty classroom for a long time after she was gone, processing what had just happened. I don't know if it changes anything. One conversation, even a good one, doesn't undo decades of damage. But it's something. Maybe it's a start. Or maybe it's just my mother trying to fix her reputation after the party. Became the scandal of their social circle. I don't know yet. What I do know is that I didn't feel the same hollow ache I used to whenever I thought about my family. I didn't feel the desperate need for their approval that had defined so much of my life. Instead, I felt something new. Peace. A quiet, fragile peace, but peace nonetheless. I locked up the classroom, stepped outside, and felt the late afternoon sunlight on my face. For the first time in years, it felt like warmth I could actually receive, not something I had to earn. Maybe that's what healing really looks like. Not one big moment of forgiveness or closure, but 1,000 tiny choices to keep standing. Keep breathing. Keep creating a life that's finally yours. And that's what I'm doing, every single day.